Keval we already know. We have here three wonderful guest speakers. Welcome and thanks for coming. We have Libero Mureddu, pianist and composer, who teaches contemporary free and electroacoustic improvisation at the Sibelius Academy. At the moment, Libero is working with dance and music group Liquid, and also, no, not anymore. Not anymore. Korvat Auki ensemble, maybe? No, not that one either. maybe you can enlighten us.
Yeah.
And you're also pursuing your doctoral degree. That went right. Fantastic. Welcome, Libero. Then we have Jussi Kannaste, tenor saxophone player, composer, teacher. Jussi is lecturer and the head of jazz department at the Sibelius Academy. And he regularly performs. I might not say anything anymore. Welcome, Jussi.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Natasha Loges, professor of musicology at the Hochschule für Musik Freiburg, specializing in German romantic composers, and previously head of postgraduate programs at the Royal College of Music in London, and has recently been appointed as a docent at the Sibelius Academy. Welcome, Natasha. So I will now hand the microphone to Keval, who will moderate the discussion. Have fun.
Good luck. Okay, I think we have a lot to talk about, but maybe we start. It's a nice way to start by just each of you telling everybody a little bit about your artistic practice and its relationship to this topic. Maybe we just set the scene a little bit, and that will open the doors to the conversation, I think. So, Libero.
Yes, so my name is Libero Mureddu. My background is many different things. I started studying composition in Milan. I did the whole degree. Then, in the meanwhile, I also had about 7 years as a jazz player, as a professional jazz player in Italy. Then went back to composition, then left Italy, went to Finland to study electronic music. And eventually, I mean, maybe the red line across all those things is that I always improvised, and nowadays I'm mostly active in improvisation. Maybe another thing important to say is that since 2010, I work as intendant of the Contemporary Ensemble at the Academy. That's also related with the topic of a program and how to choose programs. For me, maybe nowadays my practice, well, first of all, working with the free improvisation, which is not, let's say, the most popular genre of music, if it can be said, is in itself a bit of a political act, is an act of maybe resistance at times, or often it feels a bit like that. But maybe nowadays I would say that a lot of the political is reflected in me a lot on how I do things, the things that are around the music. The choice of, what I use, the software I use, the technology I use, the way I travel to the venue, the way I address the people that work in a venue. And that's what I try to also show as an example to the others, from, the main concert organizer to the stage cleaner or the cleaners themselves. Those are all for me very, very important people. I mean, they're all essential actually when making a concert. So maybe nowadays there is more this materialism side in what I do that is very, very important for me, and that I try to bring with me in the things I do artistically.
Thank you, Libero. There, I have like 100 questions already, but maybe we keep going around first. So Jussi, maybe you could just say a bit about your artistic practice.
Where should I start? So I play saxophone, jazz music, and I have to say I'm a late bloomer. I maybe during the Corona years I kind of figured out what should I do with my music and my playing, and how much I need playing in order to survive. It's a kind of a method of therapy for me. And one part of the therapy is that instead of going towards myself and looking at myself, I need to find out if I'm helping somebody else and taking a stand and speaking out about inequalities, then I'm actually helping me also more than if I were helping me only. And I try to, with my own music now, I try to kind of, and for me, I think the word political means not like party political, but it means like something that is societal, dealing with society. So I'm not in right or left or where. I'm just, trying to speak about things that are kind of mundane and have been always there, like equality and preserving nature and those kind of things. And with my own music, I want to find new ways of expression. I'm not so interested anymore, playing the right note at the right time. With rhythm, I'm really trying to be really precise, because that's all the thing we have in jazz and in African American music. But instead of like improvising, I have tunes that when there's the improvising section, it's not about chords or scales or so, but it's about I try to improvise like people talk. Or one of the tunes that talks about my marriage problems, I try to improvise like I mumble at home, and so those kind of are inspiration to me also. And I think nowadays I have this urge. I just turned 50, and I didn't buy myself a Harley Davidson. Instead of, I promised that I need to do something with my music and take a stand. And I want to make sure that my music is right on target. And I want to play my music to the world I want to create. And then if we're thinking about jazz and the repertoire and the standards from the tradition, I try to take those tunes that I feel close to my heart, and then kind of ruling out maybe some of the tunes, lots of tunes, but then kind of collecting the repertoire that kind of represents me and how I play. And so maybe that's enough.
Yeah, that's good. I have another 100 questions, so this is good. And Natasha?
Well, I feel really honoured to be part of this. It's part of this gathering as a guest. I think you and I come from similar places in many ways, and if I think about the political in my work as a researcher, which connects to the concerts that I have the great joy and the privilege of programming, or if I'm invited to a radio broadcast, or like if you have a platform, what do you do with that platform? And one of the many provocations for me is the gap between the core repertoire of the conservatoire and the actual student body, which to me, I mean, if we are telling our students that we want them to figure out who they are and have something interesting to say, then they do need different models and ways of being. And so for me, that's the bridge I'm continually trying to cross, that on the one hand, realistically, students and many orchestral players and opera houses need some point of orientation. They need a core or a basis or a canon or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily align with how they see themselves in the world or what they want the world to sound like. And so as an educator, I think it is up to me, like you, to give them tools to make the world they want to make, as opposed to serving a historic version of a world which brought many problems with it. There's lots of aspects of 20th century history that we are not proud of for good reasons, and yet we seem to keep reproducing the structures which generated a particular cultural life. So I think there is a relationship between culture and society which is complex, but worth trying to unpick through artistic and pedagogical practice?
Okay, that's 300 questions in about 45 minutes. Okay, so some things that have come up, like let's say themes that are already emerging in this are to do with identity and aligning individual creative or pedagogic voices with your own perspective. So not creating a practice that serves a function that's independent of your own attitude towards the world. In that vein, I wonder if, we can take it in terms of let's just see how the conversation goes, but I'm interested, maybe Jussi, you could start. You said about turning 50, wanting to make music that reflects who you are, and you said that you wanted to be on target. I'm wondering what that target is, and if that same intention that you have to make your music on target is something which you impart to your students, and in what way?
Maybe my target is how could I put it? I like the Finnish philosopher Esa Saarinen said that he wants to make the people think how they think. So I want to, if people come to my concert, I want them to, after the concert, to leave like thinking a bit differently, and then not by provocation and not by saying that you were doing things wrong and so on, but kind of trying to say what I value the most. And maybe you should also take a step back and think again, what do you think about X or Y or Z? And maybe then just express through the kind of expression and the beauty and the feelings of my music, or the tradition or the repertoire that I'm playing from the tradition of jazz, kind of the humanity in this is kind of maybe the in broader sense. But how to bring it to the education, it's hard, because you can't force the students to be an activist. And when they are there in the 5th floor of the music center, they are in the they're in the bebop bubble, and they want to play the right notes, and they want to swing and groove and play the standards. And if I say that you have to think about something else than the bubble, they're like no. And then I think that's also the thing that we should do. We should educate them, and we should learn them to play. And it's a function of our school, that the school is for the foundation and for the foundation only. And then after the school, they should think that what should I do with the music? And maybe we go to that later, that I feel that we are too focused on how, aspect how in the jazz department. We should also focus on why and what's this music for. And I try to every now and then give some glimpses from the history and tell about a certain tune or composition or an artist, that about the struggles or the background of the music or the composition, to give them kind of idea that this music didn't just he or she just didn't write this music seeing like a camera and then the tune is called Camera. There's a meaning, there's a message, and can you hear there's the blues, and the blues is the pulse of the African American culture. And by the way, thank you so much for the amazing performance. And also I heard the blues from the accompaniment. So you could hear the African American pulse, or the tragic, the story. So those are things we need to really focus on, and not only by the teachers of the jazz department, but also thinking when we invite international artists, so they would also come there and talk about other things also than playing the right note at the right time.
Is this something which you both have encountered as well in your work? I mean, you articulate it, Jussi, as if to say that to some degree, and I definitely recognize it myself in my own teaching, that the students come with a certain expectation sometimes of what they think the institution is there for. And in those cases, it seems that the student's idea of the institution aligns with the institution's traditional value system. So if you as educators feel that your value system pedagogically, artistically is different from the tradition and different from those students' expectations, how do you negotiate that in your work, Natasha?
I have enormous privileges. That means I can keep my classes very small, and there is always space for discussion and experimentation. And I know that there are many, many learning contexts in which that is not possible. That is something that we have in many parts of Northern Europe, which I think many of us take for granted. To be able to have a class of 6 or 8 people is an unbelievable luxury. You can get to know your students as individuals, and then you have the time to nurture and let people unfold at the pace and in the direction that is right for them, which might change in 10 years' time. So I think I've totally lost track of what your actual question was. I was thinking about what my classes are.
The question was essentially, how do you as an educator balance the expectations of the students with what you feel your responsibility is, and where that intersects with this idea of a traditional education?
But I think this is something that you answered really well. The expectation of the student should ideally be to learn to think, to take responsibility for their own thinking. And this is really tiring, isn't it? Like, to have to think about every single thing that you do is exhausting, and it can lead to stasis, which is bad. You just say, you know what, I'll just not do anything because everything is so complicated. So I think it's a little bit like homing pigeons. You know, you sort of create a space to fly out, but you say, look, I'm happy to tell you that this can be home today. This will be our base. This is our place of security. This is the place where if you ask me, Natasha, what should I do? I will say, I'll tell you what to do. Because sometimes it helps, doesn't it? If somebody says to you, this is what you can do today. You don't need to micro-examine every phrase, every implication of this work. Because I do think there is a balance to be found between thinking actively and paralysis, because you're so overwhelmed by the complexity.
Analysis paralysis.
Paralysis, thank you.
It really is a thing though, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. And Libero, for you, as somebody who works in electroacoustic music,
Yes.
how do these issues of tradition and expectation manifest? Are they different from those of us who come from repertoires with longer histories?
Well, definitely I feel very privileged. I'm lucky because I work mostly with experimental art forms. So in a way, there's not this sort of friction between traditions, expectations, and so on. So it's very different in a way. I'm really, my role is more to try to bring as many possible viewpoints as possible to students. That's what I actively do, both in the contemporary music and in the electroacoustic or improvisatory practice. Maybe there are more clashes that might be at the institutional level or societal level, because anyway, at times I work with something that has a long history in Finland, but that history has not been so recognized at the academic institutional level for a long time.
Could you give an example of what you mean by that?
Oh, I make an example of something that just came to mind. For example, we did Fausto Romitelli's An Index of Metals, the opera. It was the first Finnish premiere. And the intermezzos are actually stolen. He stole them because he was very sick at the end of his life from an electronic duo called the Pansonic. Pansonic, for me as an Italian, were legendary. You know, I know people that moved to Finland because Pansonic were from Finland. Then I arrived here and basically nobody knew who Mika Vainio is or was, by now. And for me it was really shocking. And I tried, for example, to invite them, or at least one of them, when we did the premiere, and I noticed that, there was a bit like, okay, what is that? So maybe that's the the history, that parallel history that was not so recognized. Of course, I could talk also about other things. I mean, musicians like Ivan Parker, I would love to invite him here, or other people. I know that many people wouldn't necessarily know who he is, or maybe there will be a resistance on it. When it comes to contemporary music, maybe not really expectations, but I really tried to bring things that were not so popular in the canon of contemporary music in Finland, say minimalist music. I opened one concert of the ensemble with the Mureddu, the noise artist from Japan. I tried to do these things, bring different ways of doing contemporary music.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. You lead us very nicely onto the thing I wanted to talk about next, which is the concrete work of programming and creating concerts, because I think all of you in your roles, both as artists, researchers and teachers, have had a lot of experience in actually putting together a program which is then publicly shared. So this is kind of like the step after you've done the learning of the material, you know how to work with material, but then you have the bigger challenge of integrating materials into like temporal structures like concerts. And I wonder, I'm sure it varies, but could you talk a bit about what guides that work? What is the motivation for concert programming? What are the motivations of concert programming for each of you? And how does it, and how has it shifted over the course of your careers? Natasha?
Okay, I'll try. I think that there is something absolutely magical about live performance. I love recordings and all the rest of it, but there is something about the moment of performance which is unique, and which is certainly for students, for younger musicians, it has so, maybe rubbish, what am I saying? Younger musicians. For musicians, it is really important to go and do the work at the instrument for the people in the room. So that's why all of my courses tend to end in some form of concert, which means that the students have to navigate things like programmers, venue managers, finances, advertising, and then this big, terrifying zone of audiences. What do audiences want? What can you persuade an audience to accept? And it's that work of negotiation where I think they do their real learning, not because Professor Logis has taught them some repertoire, that's all fine, but bridging that new knowledge with pre-existing structures over which they don't have any control. That's where I think you learn to do the diplomatic work of, if we're talking about reflecting the political, when you leave the conservatoire, you have to engage with the world as it is. So I'm lucky, I live in a prosperous German city. I can say to my students, go, find a venue, find a programmer, put together a program, write the marketing, bring it to class, we'll workshop it. And I think that that's more valuable in a way than the other kinds of historical musical material. I do that anyway, but transforming that into lived musical experience is essential.
So programming is a very practical thing in terms of the way you approach it as a teacher, that you're interested less in helping them construct certain kinds of repertoire connections in a program and more learning how to actually get a program through the stages of existing.
Yeah, because at the moment when something works on the stage and you see their faces and you feel the energy in the room, the euphoria that comes from a successful performance is incredible. That is the goal for me, for them to feel that and to feel that they participated in making something that is unique to them and not simply a reproduction, an obedient reproduction of pre-taught, pre-existing values. And this is perhaps something which differentiates the three of us, because for me, as a historian of 19th century German music, I sit in a very conservative space, and I have to navigate that conservatism every day. I find it really enriching. Sometimes find it exhausting, as you know. But I always have to navigate with people who think that music basically ended with Brahms. I have to give that position legitimacy. I have to respect it and I have to work with it. So, and I think for many of my students, they would agree that that's what they have to, that's the world that they have to navigate, unless they take a different decision and they say we're going to go towards contemporary music where there are different restrictions. I'm not saying there are no restrictions, or they move to jazz where there's a whole set of other restrictions. So it's a case of, pick your battle. In our case, we navigate the canon all the time. It's there.
How does that work in your work as a jazzer? This idea of having to build concert projects or concert programs, navigating traditions, canons, audiences.
Sorry.
Well, maybe there's lots of different ways. For me, it's like the recent years I have tried to invent these concepts for, like, for instance, starting the concerts or the gigs with a kind of cleaning the room tune, or kind of I don't know whether people come. Would they come from work or from sauna or from gym or whatever? I want to play a tune that I kind of tune them into the space and into this music and into these sounds and the colors we play, and then I'm kind of, I try to feel the pulse also from the audience, and then also I try to practice the art of improvising also the programming during playing. So I'm improvising when I'm playing, but I'm improvising also the set. So naturally we have set of tunes that we might play, but then there's a set of tunes that we choose not to play, but we can take any of the tunes in any second, and I don't even need to say to my group that we go there, because I just play a few notes that they know that, okay, now we go that direction, because of, I think that my band is a quartet, but then there's an audience, and then we become a quintet, actually. So then we're all there together.
So your programming can be shaped by your audience in real time.
Yes, yeah. And then also for the students, when I speak, we talk about programming in any set. If you have a, whatever cocktail, set, I say to them that please think of the tunes that you will play, even though people might just, drink coffee or champagne or whatever, and they are not paying attention. But still, what's the occasion? What's the company that called you? What's the if there's a guest speaker coming in 1 hour? So please try to think your programming. What's the word? Like yeah, and thinking of the occasion.
Yeah.
And then try to think about the lyrics, even though if there's no singer. Try to think, if somebody comes and asks it, yeah, I really love your playing and thank you so much, then you can say that, yeah, actually great that you noticed, because we played these and these tunes because they reflect their, your topic of the day, or this seminar is about this and this. And then from that on, they learn to program their own sets, their own music, and try to do the beforehand planning and then also improvising while playing.
Yeah, so somehow empowering the students to have ownership over the material, to know why they're, like as you said earlier, not just the how, but why they're doing what they're doing, and to be able to articulate that, because that ability to articulate is somehow the foundation of them reproducing for the next time and saying, okay, I understand my motivation clearly, and therefore next time I can do X, Y, or Z.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you the same thing, but maybe the next thing I just want to dwell on in that space then is, in each of your educational contexts, how much currently do you think students have the spaces and forums in which to do that kind of work? Because I could say that from my perspective in the classical field, still I don't feel that there is enough space given to this individual thinking and creative work. Libero? How is it in the electronic world?
Well, I think again we are in a very privileged position because the thing I loved from day one when I arrived in Finland, and by the way, in this room there is a person, one of the person that has been extremely influential for me that I met from day one, was that each of us as students had a completely different path. We were coming from different places. Some people were into pop music, some people, with a very, very serious compositional background like me, some from electronic, non-academic background, and there was space for everybody. And that's a really, really what, for me, coming from a very conservative institution, I can say, as the Milan Conservatoire was really shocking. This question, what can we do for you? I remember with Andrew the first day, and I was like, doesn't work like that. I mean, you should tell me what I should. And he was really, no, please. It took me a long time. So it's a very, very special situation, I have to say. And I think that continues. I'm a part-time teacher, so I'm not too much involved with the mechanism, with the machinery of the department. But I think that tradition continues, definitely. So that's what I would say, yes. Definitely more about the contemporary music things on the topic, yeah.
My impression from being here as someone who is not from this educational tradition or institution is that Finland cultivates such an extraordinary amount of freedom, like academic freedom, intellectual freedom, artistic freedom, that it seems to me that we are in a very privileged position to make the kinds of changes that we are all hinting at here in terms of empowering students more, because there is such a culture in this society anyway of autonomy and freedom of voice. In your department at the moment, what is the relationship between curricula which guide the students to fulfill certain criteria and individual artistic exploration? Or are those actually just the same thing? Am I making a binary that doesn't exist?
Well, maybe, yeah. I think that the thing is that we can, in the 5th floor of Music Center, we can give the students everything they need from starting from the community, the ear training, ensemble, history, all the lessons that, backs up their, musicianship. But the thing we cannot tell them is how to play. So they need to figure out themselves. And sometimes it's too much that they try to say that, tell me how is this good? Should I play like this? And then I'm like, that's one way of playing, but you need to figure out that yourself. And also how they think about music and the why and what's this music for, they have to figure it out themselves. Then the curricula is there, then that's kind of our responsibility to go by the book with the studies and everything. But from the side, we need to kind of, let's say, if kind of maybe this is too rough, but the conservatories they teach how you play. But I think from university also we need to give them tools as musicians and jazz musicians. But then we have to try to make them think and kind of they have to be their oma lääkäri, your own doctor. Yeah, they have to find their own answers, but we can help them by giving the tuition.
Give them the medicine.
Yeah.
Okay, so history has been mentioned a few times, but before we go on, do you want to say a few words about this thing about how your students in their curricula are able to develop freedom within the 19th century rules?
So I feel a bit depressed saying this after both of you. Because,
Very positive.
yeah, you are. I was thinking I should drink whatever you're drinking. The departments with which I work most closely are piano, what I will rudely call the elite strings. So this is violin and cello, and voice. And these are terrains of power. these are terrains of historically constructed power, which are extremely difficult, sometimes for good reasons, to change. I would say that on bad days, I feel that conservatoire students are getting an almost identical education to the one I received 35 years ago in London, which is itself not that different from the curriculum that Felix Mendelssohn constructed in Leipzig in 1843. Some people might see that as a good thing. You know, you can't argue with where people are. I feel that there is a lack of autonomy in those departments, which result in students being really overwhelmed by freedom. You give them freedom and they don't know what it necessarily means. You say, assemble a program, they don't know how to start. You say, here's the score, there's no recording. There's no recording. What are you going to do? They don't know what to do. And these are systemic, I really hope I'm not being too tactless here, but these are systemic failures of conservatoire systems which repeat in particular groups. Now, of course, I come back to this. There are some people who really feel happiest being told what to do. And if that's what they want, then there are figures of authority who are very happy to tell them what to do. But I think I've encountered enough students who want to be told to be themselves. And this is a particular acute thing for me because a lot of overseas students end up in my classes. I'm not sure why, but I find students who are in positions of racial disadvantage, financial disadvantage, gender disadvantage, who are sitting in the room and want to be taken seriously as human beings. And at that point, the traditional conservatoire piano curriculum does not help them. So these are the kinds of situations where I think, okay, so what can I do as a music historian? And there are very often there are not simple answers to that.
Yeah, these are big questions. And you have the privilege, Natasha, of not having to be sort of tactful. You are not in your institution, so you can say all the things that I might be thinking. But it's a good question because the implication of this is that there are quite fundamental things that have to change. This is not a question of like changing the color of the person that teaches the course or changing the name of one of the composers who you have in your set repertoire. These are actually just cosmetic ways of preserving existing power structures and ways of thinking. And if you want to introduce new ways of thinking, you actually have to create new kinds of institutions. So I open that to the room to dwell on for a moment, because the thing I wanted to talk about now is history, because you've all mentioned either forgotten histories or histories of repertoire or being historian as teacher. And I'm wondering, in the context of repertoire in particular, do you feel that repertoire as musical material can have historical baggage? Does the material itself sometimes have the possibility of being loaded because of its context? And if you do believe that's the case, what do you feel is the responsibility of the artist on stage and or the teacher to deal with that baggage? Is that baggage dealt with by discarding that repertoire? Is that baggage dealt with by reframing that repertoire or other?
I'd like to say something about this. I think both strategies, or at least I noticed I try to implement both strategies. First of all, I have to say that in the contemporary ensemble of the Academy, the programming is done always in a sort of collective way. I mean, there are different teachers, each of them come with some suggestions. At times it's my suggestion, sometimes it's a negotiation, sometimes it's a collective work. It changes every time. That's, first of all, it's fair to say. When it comes to those things, I think it's extremely important to, well, nowadays I'm a lot into reframing things. I'm making a very practical example, not from contemporary music, but you play Schumann, a repertoire that, because I studied in Milan, I had to do a lot in my studies in composition. That music has nothing conservative in itself. have nothing of that aura that inevitably has sedimented on it. I mean, the way the voice ends, and not ends actually, becomes piano at the end. That's pure magic. That's something extremely, I mean, tons of pages have been written on his ability of blending, morphing voice and piano. And those things I think should be more and more rediscovered in that music when it comes to repeating that music. Because that music doesn't suggest anything conservative actually. It's totally breaking the two roles in 3 seconds. That's absolutely incredible what he was able to do. But of course, the repertoire has it. You know, for years we played music coming more from the post-Darmstadt tradition, so very pitch-based. Extended techniques were not seen very well in that language. That's a language I grow with in a way, and I see now a lot of limits. So of course, different ways of playing, different ways of writing music, the whole experimental schools, also ways non-European. So I think it's both a really polishing, removing dust, that's one act, and the other is, of course, I think George Lewis says it, remove the cone that makes things invisible. You know, so there are two operations. There's a third metaphor that I really love is the Foucault creating windows where there were walls. And I think that can be done in many different ways. That's at least what I'm trying to do, like when I think about those topics. They're very, very dear to me, those topics.
Natasha, how is it for you? Or you, so I don't mind if you go whichever order you'd like to go.
You sure?
What should I say? I think in the, let's say, the traditional jazz repertoire, I don't think if there's tunes that, there are tunes that we maybe shouldn't play anymore, but not so much. I think the baggage comes that you have to know the history. You have to know why this composition is composed and who sang or played it, and what's the history and the message behind it. In order to, you have to be really, you have to go deep. And then if like you mentioned George Floyd, like you compose a tune and you name it like George, it's sometimes for the students it's too superficial. They need to do more. They need to be a kind of a scholar of this music and know the kind of the history and tradition, and then take a stand, then speak out, and then compose a tune that they try to make a difference. So I think that's the only package that we have, not maybe only, but the strongest package that you have to know what you're singing or playing about. And if you're only playing, you have to somehow express the message without the words and the actual message. So I think that's the main thing in the jazz repertoire.
And how is it for you as a 19th century oriental? Although let's make clear that your research practices in recent years have moved through the 19th century very much into 20th century territory, and maybe that is a good intersection for this thing about baggage and what comes with repertoire.
Historic baggage in classical music is a complete nightmare. It doesn't matter where you look. Unfortunately, the history of the art form that many of us love is populated by monsters. And whether this is someone like Berlioz stalking his first wife, I mean, the way Berlioz married Harriet Smithson is nothing but stalking. I had to reread for a book I wrote, Wagner's essay on Jewishness, which he wrote anonymously and then republished under his name later. And people know that Wagner is anti-Semitic, but when you read those words again, and I have no skin in this game, I'm not Jewish, I have no Jewish family, I'm not even European, and yet I thought, this is actually really revolting. Or if I think about Bruckner and his 9 proposals of marriage to very young women who he did not even know. My list of sort of men from classical music with whom I would not want to be in the train on my own is quite long. I look at Gabriel Fauré's behavior as director of Paris Conservatoire and I think, well, I'm glad I didn't have daughters who went to that institution when Gabriel Fauré was in charge. And as I say, this is a long list of behaviors which were, I just have to say this as a pianist, Leschetizky. If you look at, do people in the room know who Theodor Leschetizky is? He was one of the greatest, most influential piano pedagogues of the turn of the 20th century. One of those people, you know, I studied with X, who studied with Y, who studied with Liszt, who had coffee with Beethoven, and so therefore I know, you know, he was he was probably the most important piano teacher in the history of piano teaching. And his wives got younger and younger and younger to the extent that at the very end of his career, a 12-year-old girl played for him, and anecdotally, I don't have the proof of this, anecdotally he said, oh, if you keep playing like that, you could become my 5th wife, which is sort of ha-ha and not ha-ha. So it would be easy for me to cancel all of these people, but actually we have to come to terms with the imperfections of each and every one of us, the fact that all of us do things which are repellent and wrong, which we might regret subsequently, but it is a real struggle at times, particularly from the gender perspective. The racial perspective in classical music is a hidden one, it's a silent one, but the treatment of women in classical music history is not something to be proud of on the whole.
So how does the repertoire you choose to teach and perform and program, how do you use that as a tool for addressing these challenges?
I mean, there are some things I won't program anymore because I think it's enough.
Can you just dig a bit for us as to what that means? Like, give a practical example of something which you would not program now and what you think is the consequence of that decision.
I mean, it's already been mentioned this evening. Frauenliebe und Leben is Robert Schumann's quintessential song. So it's like a textbook of how a young woman should behave. She should fall in love, she should adore her husband, and that's kind of it. And then, you know, when he dies, she should then preserve his memory for the rest of her time. And I think it's actually not as musically as interesting as has been claimed for it, so that there's actually an artistic argument which underpins my need not to hear that music again or inflict it on any of my students anymore. I've noticed that if you ask women how they feel singing it, if you actually give them permission to say what they think, then many of them will say, well, I don't feel particularly comfortable singing these words or playing this character, but I have to because it's the canon. And then I think, well, come on, Robert Schumann wrote a lot better music than this. If it has to be Schumann, let's do some other Schumann. Does it have to be Schumann? Probably not. There are other people. So giving permission to move beyond things is important. For me, the real deal breaker with Frauenliebe und Leben was reading an extract from a diary of a friend of Clara Schumann, who was spending time with her in the early 1860s, in which she said that her husband was a bigot. She described, I don't know if the word bigot translates easily into Finnish. Someone has to help me. And this for me was a real moment because Clara Schumann was so careful to protect her husband's reputation that in this one moment of unguardedness, she describes what it was like to have that 16-year marriage. It really changed the narrative for me. We are trained, many of us, to be good wives, good mothers, good partners. Just that moment where she lets her guard down made me think, I don't need to hear this anymore. This does, by the way, not mean that other people shouldn't enjoy it or perform it or whatever, but for me, I will not spend €5 to go and hear Frauen Bildern again.
Yeah, I agree. What's something that keeps coming up for all of us, it seems to be that actually history offers liberation, because you talk about uncovering histories that have been not told, or discovering stories which have been laying dormant, or encouraging students to know the history of the material they work with, that through knowledge comes the ability to make informed choices about how you work through as an artist and how you move through the world. So it strikes me that for all of you, that this kind of false binary maybe between that which is historical / traditional and that which is modern and new or 21st century it's actually not anywhere near as clear as that. It's actually that genuinely being historically curious, getting a more accurate and more complete picture of your histories, of the traditions, not just talk about tradition as an attitude, but tradition as knowledge and material, that actually is offering you all a way forward in your practice. Would you say that's a fair assessment, that history is actually providing you with answers for how you shape your musical future?
Yes, I would say, jazz music is, and the tradition, you could say that it's a tradition of innovation. So that's all the time we have learned since the blues, we've learned the music and we listen to the past generations, try to listen to them, copy, imitate, and then make those things our own. And then the next generation try to find out how the past generation, what were the innovations and inspiration that they got from the past generation. And then, so that's the key thing, that the more you see towards the history of music, the more you see to the future of music, and then you learn to know, and then you actually can be sure that if I'm singing or playing these kind of tunes and this is my kind of way of expression, then you know that that's yours. You know that what came before you, then you know that this is me. And that's, I think it's really important, to understand the tradition of innovation and tradition of inspiration. That's really a core thing.
It's a difficult question, I have to say, for me. One thing that comes to mind is that, for example, myself, as a free improviser or improviser of improvised music, that's horrible, there's no good definition for it. I often say that for me, that's Black music, that's Afro-American music. And that's a way to recognize openly the incredibly innovative elements that, starting from the bebop, but also before, definitely have been a part of that tradition. Then again, there are maybe nowadays roughly 40%, maybe less than 50% of improvisers who come from Western classical tradition or other traditions. So, and even that, of course, saying Black music forgets the Afro-Cuban part and other traditions that were from the very beginning also associated to that in the big, area of the African diaspora. So it's a complex thing. For me, it's important. It's important to connect also with the electronics. A thing that I often say to my students, I'm sure other people tell them as well, is to recognize the different ways that, for example, in dub music, the technology has been used in reggae and dub music, the mixer as an instrument. That's a very, very unique way. Or how, let's say, prosumer, quite cheap electronics have been used at the beginning in techno in Detroit, and so on and so forth, because there is a different way to use, of course, turntables in hip-hop, and so on and so forth. But if you think about it, it's quite impressive to take something, the symphonic trumpet and trombone, of course, in jazz, that's the first example, and transform it in something completely different. And that's, for me, is important. So in a way, I don't know, traditions are there, to remind myself from where it comes, what I do, and make sure that certain connections are there. For me, it's very, very important. I saw a few weeks ago Ivan Parker playing in Berlin. At some point, he quoted at the end of his solo, which of course had all the harmonics and flow, 3 notes of a Duke Ellington tune. Like, it was really, really incredible. I think many people, I don't know, didn't notice or so on. I was like, oh, wow, didn't expect that. And I think that was really the way to say, yes, this is Johnny Hodges. That's part of my history, even if I now play only harmonics and microtones and so on. That's, yes, the line is there. Same as hip hop when they take an old album and they say, Parliament Funkadelic. Yes, that's a line between you can do that and that. So I have my own personal genealogies, maybe.
Yeah, you're using history to make connections to where you are, rather than using it as like a prison to confine you, like to define your limits.
Yeah, but also to understand a bit myself, because within the European continent, but anyway, I'm half French, half Italian, with a very, very different backgrounds, politically active mother, a father who emigrated like many Italians did, 22 years in Finland. It's within the same continent, but it's also a way to understand all those differences and so on. And of course nowadays the bigger reality of the world we live in, which force in a good way us to see over the continental, how to say, limit borders. Yeah.
Natasha, do you want to add anything on this topic?
History feels like a stable thing, but if you write history, you know how unstable it is, if you see what I mean. So the history is always changing, thank God, And very often history is written at moments of ideological pressure or tension. So the bulk of music history that we inherited was written in periods of peak imperialism, when it was extremely important to define what is German music, what is French music, what is Finnish music, what is Russian music. And now many of my colleagues spend a lot of time asking, what is Ukrainian music? I have colleagues who are working in the Middle East who are trying to separate out the different threads between Israel and the surrounding areas. This is not an easy thing to do, and this is politically very, very loaded, coming back to our topic. So I think when we rely on history, when we rest on history, we need to remember that it is still a construct, and it is a very delicate construct, like made out of matchsticks. It is very often made for purposes. We need to check if those purposes align with our own ethics and values, and if they are fit for the society that we want to live in. I think a lot of classical music history needs rewriting, and I have to say some of the best examples of practice I've seen in that come from Helsinki, and are from one of the reasons why I keep coming back to this city, because it keeps teaching me how to negotiate these tensions between nation and supranational, history of a young nation or old nation, belonging and not belonging, the grey area also between tradition and history, which are not the same thing, and how both of those are expressed then in practice. Practice being a thing for now, for today, for the moment. So yeah, I benefit very much from my visits here, because Finland's particular history is very different from Germany or France or Great Britain, the 3 countries with which I've had closest contact. Finland's very precarity trains a degree of critical awareness which many other nations do not have to have. So in vulnerability you gain. I know it doesn't feel great when you're living in it, but perhaps that vulnerability feels more universal now anyway, politically.
Yeah, I think we can come back to this idea of like Finland being a place where we are primed to have these kinds of conversations and to shape new futures, because we benefit from a young identity which hasn't been given the opportunity yet to sort of get stuck in any one way of thinking. And I'm constantly coming from a very, very old country with very old ways of thinking. I'm constantly struck in a great way at how flexible the Finnish mind seems to be, the ability to shift thoughts as facts and situations on the ground change. The society has this amazing ability to shift its ways of thinking. On that note, and I'm very conscious that we should open the floor up to some questions in a moment, but talking about Finland, Helsinki, institutions, as a closing question, I'd like to ask you all, but maybe particularly you both, since this is your institution as well, but Natasha, I'm interested on your perspective as well. All of the things that we've spoken about end up coming back to this university and your role as teachers, shaping future generations of musicians and shaping curricula which prepare students for these ways of thinking. If there is one thing that you could change in the curriculum right now, what would it be? What would you add or take away? Or if you had the institutional power to do that, what would you do tomorrow?
Well,
Sorry.
As I said, I would, add some those why and what's this music for parts to the curriculum. But I would maybe at this point I would say that I heard a really interesting podcast hosted by Iiro Rantala, a Finnish piano player, and he had Kimmo Pohjonen, Finnish folk music accordion player, as a guest. And Kimmo said that we're actually doing it the wrong way in Sibelius Academy. We are taking people in by their knowledge of tradition and how they play. And like if I turn it to the jazz, we listen to the auditions, we listen how they play the blues, do they play the chord changes, are they in a swinging, is it the right notes, the pitch and everything. And if they play the chord changes right, we're like, okay, great, we take this him or her in. But instead of, we should take them in as unique voices and personalities and kind of take it another way. So we kind of, first they have the master program. So we build their personal voice and the language and people who are they, who they are. And then at the end of the studies, we kind of keep the tradition. And that kind of really stuck me. And I've been thinking that would that be the thing, because if we look at the jazz history, it has never been like he or she played the chord changes right or right notes. It's always been about unique voices, and through that. And I was kind of surprised we had this kind of just before Christmas, this kind of department seminar, and I was kind of bold enough to have the PowerPoint and say that, okay, we do it now like this in the future. How about? And they were really kind of, okay, they were the old school was present and the new school and the more, broad-minded teachers. But nobody said that this is great. Yes, let's do it. Everybody said that, no, Jussi, no. Absolutely. We tradition first, then the unique voices. But I'm kind of thinking if we lose, because I also kind of think like this legendary saxophone player Kenny Garrett said that we have been using the word bebop, which is kind of the basic language that we based our music to. It's kind of the dark force in the Star Wars, that it's kind of compelling. Like I want to see what's out there. I want to go the dark side. But when they take you in, you never get out. And bebop is kind of the same thing. If you get in too deep into bebop, you never get out. And then we face the problem that our graduates, the master level, they play the same. Yeah. And that's my nightmare. So then I'm thinking that we first would take people in as personalities, and then at the end of their studies, we would give them the tradition. But that's a long way to go, because my department wasn't with me with that thought.
Yeah,
so let's see.
The world has never changed so quickly. Well, Libero?
There's one thing that I feel the need to say in the conversation, and then I will come on my dictatorial dreams that of course I have. But one thing that I think Finland, especially when it comes to composition and many fields in classical music, is now facing the situation to understand and maybe to reframe what is Finnish and what is Finnishness. And that's a topic that for me, of course, as a naturalized Finn, is very important to say. A colleague who won recently a prize is a Finn, even though he was born somewhere else, a very important composition prize. And a lot of the public conversation was like, oh, is he really a Finn? And that's something that of course, as a half a French person, so that's nothing special, it's just a horrible colonialistic history. But of course, anyone who works in France is fine. I mean, Kaya Sariao worked in France for so many years, and I never heard anyone saying, oh, she's a Finn, she's not French. She works there, and that's okay. That's what matters. She makes great music. She works in our institution. She writes operas for our opera houses, and that's okay. That's it, end of the conversation. But of course, it's easy to say things coming from a history where it was great to have all objects from different countries, from the Indochine, which is what place is, it doesn't even exist, and so on and so forth, of course. And the Finnish history is a history of traumas also, as you sort of kind of pointed out. It's a very, very complex and delicate history in which there are those frictions between identity, suffering, wanting finally to say this is our identity, and so on and so forth. But I think we are also in the moment in which opening up to what it means in making Finnish or music in Finland is something important. That said, when it comes to the curriculum, one thing that I don't know, I tried to answer to this question, it wasn't easy, but maybe critical program, what did I write? Critical concert program design, that would be super interesting, maybe it exists, but really thinking how programs have been designed, how they could be transformed, and so on.
It does exist in my
It does
department.
exist.
In my
You
department,
see,
it exists. I run a course
fantastic.
on program design and the history of programming.
Yes,
Yes.
that's great. The second would be maybe something about the technology we use in advertisement, the critical usage, because in Finland there's this wonderful trust in social media, and even grant foundations, they sort of promote, Instagram and so on, but those are part of the problem. Those are definitely part of the problem. They are not neutral. Technology is not neutral. I thought that today should I put something on Instagram about today's discussion. I will put it also on Mastodon, which is, my way to feel clean and okay. I do both, I do the good and the evil, a bit like the Lars von Trier Riet, where say you try to put together the good and the evil. That's what I'm trying to do. It's of course a compromise, but that's something that should be discussed.
Yes, there's a
more.
negotiation there, isn't
Yes,
there?
yes,
Yeah.
because inevitably as artists we need to advertise our things. We are even asked nowadays because of the world we live in. But by doing it, we actively use language from marketing, so sometimes better, sometimes worse. But we have to do all those things, and I find this very, very difficult and more problematic. But I don't have any answer, of course. Invisibility is not an answer. Yes.
No, running away isn't an answer.
Yes.
And Natasha, how about you?
Difficult question. But in the interest of concision, I will say 4 words, which is get rid of competitions. One of the most devastating pieces of research I read in the last couple of years, which ended up in a book chapter for a book that's coming out in the autumn, was about the ways in which music competitions harm students, harm audiences, kill any hope of repertoire innovation. And they are fundamentally, I'm sure many people in this room have been judges in competitions, as have I. They are morally bankrupt events. So if there's one thing I could free my students from, it would be this treating music as a sort of Olympics. I just don't get it. That would be mine.
Thank you very much. I think at this point, a round of applause for my amazing panel guests. In my experience of doing these kinds of things, I always think the best types of conversations are the ones which end with many, many more questions. So thank you all for being so thoughtful and somehow concise, but also very, very nuanced and detailed in your reflections on this. We do have some time for questions from the house, and I'm sure you have many, so please just throw a hand and we will do our best to answer.